Welcome, everybody. We appreciate you joining us for today's CSCRS Research to Practice Bites webinar on what we can learn from fatal automated vehicle crashes. We're joined today by Meredith King, who is a graduate research assistant in transportation engineering at the University of Tennessee at Knoxville. If you're not familiar with the Collaborative Sciences Center for Road Safety, or CSCRS, our mission is to accelerate progress in reducing transportation-related injuries and deaths by utilizing a systems approach, bringing perspectives from planning, engineering, public health, data science, and robotics to the field of road safety. We're one of two national centers with a designated research focus on transportation safety and the only national center with a focus on the safe system approach. We bring together staff, faculty, and students from different UNC departments, as well as those at our partner institutions that you see here, UT Knoxville being one of those. Just a bit of housekeeping before we get started. All participants are muted, but you can submit questions in the Q&A box. We will answer those at the end. We've got a little bit of time baked in for a Q&A discussion period. And today's session is being recorded. CSCRS will make the recording and the slides available later. And just one helpful tip, if you choose the speaker view option at the top of your Zoom screen, you can optimize the screen and the slides of the current speaker. We're happy to welcome Meredith King. Meredith, please go ahead when you're ready and kick things off.
All right, thank you, Dan. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, thank you everybody for tuning in today. I will be discussing what we can learn from fatal automated vehicle crashes by taking a closer look at crash narratives in the media. The team on this research project is all from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, including myself, Dr. Asad Khatak, Dr. Antora Haq, Dr. Numan Ahmad, and Yongsong Gu. So just to start off with a little bit of background, the Society of Automated Engineers has given 6 different levels of driving automation, ranging from 0 to 5, with 5 being full autonomy. Right now, several manufacturers have released cars with level 2 automation, which provides both steering and brake acceleration support. And we can expect to see production of level 3 vehicles within the next 5 years, which will introduce even more vehicular autonomy onto the roadways. The conceptual framework of this study, so the increasing levels of vehicular automation begets the need to study AV crashes in more detail, and the media portrayal of these crashes is an important characteristic because it can impact consumer perceptions, which has further implications. So we used text mining to gain insights into these consumer perceptions. Looking at what consumer perceptions can impact within transportation engineering, one, it can impact the market penetration. So how consumers perceive vehicles will impact how often they buy them, and then at what rate they are deployed onto our roadways. It can also impact long-range infrastructure and planning operations, as well as crash culpability. So just to go over market penetration, the figure on the right is the hype cycle created by Gartner, which just shows how technology can, based on the hype generated for technology, the rate of deployment can change over time, depending on public perception. And so the language used by journalists in their news articles can impact how people view this technology and what hype is garnered for it. We also know that we need to plan for the deployment of AVs with ITS technologies. So technologies such as 5G towers, roadside units, real-time adaptive traffic signals, and V2X communications will need to be included in many long-range plans. And understanding consumer perceptions will just give planners a more complete picture of the timeline at which they can expect the deployment of these vehicles. And lastly, about the framework, crash culpability is another key key factor that is impacted by consumer perceptions. So it's not always clear from a legal standpoint who should be responsible in an AV crash. One high-profile case was the death of Elaine Herzberg. She was crossing the street at night and was hit by an Uber that was operating in a self-driving mode. It's kind of a controversial case because the driver was looking at their phone. The driver was looking at their phone while they were operating the vehicle, but the vehicle camera footage showed that the pedestrian was visible several seconds before the pedestrian was hit, and the vehicle systems failed to stop. And so it's kind of a gray area, and the driver was charged with negligent homicide. And media narratives can certainly shape how a jury may view these cases and just how the public views them in general. And then looking at the literature, generally AV crash data is limited just because these vehicles are still in early stages of deployment. Narrative data generally focuses around the California DMV testing program, which required manufacturers to report whenever there was an automated vehicle crash in California. And by analyzing these reports, it was found that rear-end crashes are the most frequent due to a discrepancy in perception between the conventional vehicles and the automated vehicles. And then also it was found that most automated vehicle crashes occur on highway segments. The study area for this study, generally in the US, we used 202 total fatal Tesla crashes. Most of them were in the US, but there were also some cases from around the globe. And this map just shows how they are distributed across the US. Generally, they are on the West Coast and in Florida. The methodology for this study, we took the narratives from the local news stations' websites. Each article was discussing a fatal crash involving one or more Tesla. And then we used WordStat to extract some keywords. And we also used Python, Excel, and ArcGIS to analyze the data. So some of the results from WordStat and the text mining, we found that driver and vehicle are the most commonly used words in these articles. We also pre-selected some keywords to look at how frequently they are used. Most interestingly, fire is used in 30% of the cases. Autopilot is used in around 14% of the cases. Pedestrian is in 8%. And it was also reported, we counted which Tesla models were mentioned the most, and Model S was reported the most out of the 4 Tesla models. Just looking at the keyword distribution, we wanted to see if there was any geographical tendencies with the keywords. It doesn't really appear that there are. They are just more isolated in the areas on the West Coast and on Florida, or in Florida. Then in text mining, we also modeled which topics were discussed in the narratives. And so vehicle behavior was one topic. And this is what the driver was doing before the crash occurred. So a phrase such as lose control would be in this topic. Crash investigation and contributing factors. This shows kind of which crash details are presented in the narratives. A phrase such as attempt to cross shows that maybe there was a pedestrian fatality in the crash or a pedestrian involvement. Oh, my bad. And then a fiery crash, of course, shows that a fire occurred in the narrative. And then lastly, casualties and injuries. This topic just shows the manners of death discussed in the crash. So something such as dead at the scene would show this topic. The proximity plot. So in text mining, you can map the co-occurrences between keywords and other keywords. So this here is which keywords were most associated with pedestrian. And as you can see, night is most associated with pedestrian. And this is interesting because it can call into question perceptions about it can call into question how the public will perceive pedestrian detection systems, especially at nighttime. It might raise concerns for the safety of these systems. And then lastly, we looked at single and multi-vehicle classification. It shows that the articles are discussing words such as tree, more with single vehicle crashes, and words such as Honda or motorcycle with multiple vehicle crashes. So of the media study, some important findings. Fire appears in 30% of the cases. This is a large amount of cases that discuss fire. So we examined that further, which I'll show in the next slides. And then another interesting finding was that pedestrian and night can exhibit frequent co-occurrences. So both of these findings, I think, can negatively impact the public's perception of the safety systems within these vehicles. Some limitations of this study are the small sample size. Also, some of the news articles were not originally written in English, and so the automated translations may not truly be representative. And then the geographic distribution is more in the US than in the other countries. So we looked a little bit more into fire with a smaller sample. And in this data, there was 26% report of fire, which is a lot higher than when you look at conventional vehicle crashes from the FARS dataset. Only 3.3% of those crashes involved fire. 13% of the vehicles in single vehicle crashes caught fire. And we found these with using the Somers-D probability test, which also showed that autopilot engagement did not correlate with driver survivability. So I'll probably come back to this video, but this shows a Tesla Model X that caught fire. Fortunately, nobody was killed, but it is tragic nonetheless. And I just wanted to talk a little bit more about these EV fires and how they are difficult to put out. So these fires tend to start in the battery. The battery is composed of nearly 3,000 lithium-ion cells, which contain a very flammable liquid electrolyte. And when something malfunctions in the battery will heat up, and this can cause the electrolyte to catch fire. And because there's so much stored energy in the battery, these fires are very powerful, very hot, and very difficult to put out. Some ways that firefighters try to put out these fires, they can lift the EV into water, which is generally discouraged by manufacturers. They also have some technology that can pierce the battery and penetrate it from a safe distance. But engineers are still working to improve these fire safety mechanisms and also improve the firefighting techniques. They're looking into using solid state batteries instead. And this issue also calls for a need for improved training and updated standards. So in closing, what I've learned from the narratives, fire is used in 30% of these articles, and pedestrian and night exhibit frequent co-occurrence. So both of these details can negatively impact public perception of Tesla vehicle safety, which can have implications for crash culpability, market penetration, and long-term planning. The next steps will be to perform a sentiment analysis using the text mining tools and developing a domain-specific dictionary to gain further insights into the positive or negative connotation of the words and phrases used in these articles. These are my references, and thank you for listening to my presentation. Are there any questions?
Thanks so much, Meredith. I really appreciate that. Super interesting. Few questions have come in, and so let's get to some of those. And anyone out there, if you've still got questions, go ahead and send those in. We've got some time to take those in the remaining period. I guess I wanted to start with one comment that came up, or a question that came up, is this idea of media, maybe media bias or media framing in a way that either is sort of more sympathetic to the vehicle itself or the vehicle technology than not, I suppose. So I wonder, generally, did you find that there was some kind of in the media narratives that you looked at, did it seem like a lot of them were fairly sort of sympathetic to the vehicle, the technology, and its capabilities, or was that hard to tease out?
It seemed that most of the articles tried to remain relatively objective, just reporting the details and not giving too much bias. There are a few articles that seemed sort of critical of specifically autopilot systems, also the safety of EV batteries. But I think the sentiment analysis, which will be the next step of this project, will help answer that question a little bit better by showing more the connotations of the language that was used.
I see. Okay, great. There were a couple of folks asked if you might be able to, while we're doing the Q&A, go back a couple of slides to the one with your kind of big findings or major takeaways. I can't remember. Yeah. Oh. Maybe one more.
This one, or
yeah, I think that's it. Correct me, folks, if I'm wrong. Those of you who requested that, just kind of we can sit on these and folks can digest a few of those big takeaways while we're talking. So it's interesting because this is the second webinar in the past few months that we've done on media framing as a topic, and so another media framing webinar was really about how we assign blame, the media kind of narrative that can assign blame, and it was really specifically looking at pedestrians and people versus the car or the vehicle itself. And so similar questions have come up. If you noticed in the tone or the language or the framing of the story, is it still sort of the vehicle did this and then the person was wearing dark clothing, or it was at night, or kind of the media basically using the framing of the story being a way to assign blame in some way, sort of maybe subtly in the way it's laid out?
Yes, we did look at that, especially if I go back to this, where it shows that car was more associated with single and driver was more associated with multiple. I thought perhaps maybe, especially in single vehicle crashes, the fact that car is talked about more than driver might show that the technology is more being blamed than the driver themselves. We didn't find concrete evidence of this. I do think that a lot of times autopilot was focused a lot, and this might be a subtle way to sort of suggest maybe blame for the safety systems of the technology.
There's a question here, really good one. I hadn't thought of this. That were there any words or phrases, maybe patterns, that emerged from occurring regularly in the AV crash reports that you didn't anticipate or really surprised you, kind of from when you went into the research?
I'm not sure if any. Oops, sorry about that. If any were surprising. I think most of the findings were sort of as to be expected. But I was kind of surprised that autopilot wasn't discussed even more than it already was.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. There were a few follow-up questions on this, and I know you clarified this early in the process, but maybe it's worth revisiting again. The research that you did was primarily focused on Tesla-involved crashes. Can you say anything about the reasoning for kind of focusing the research on that subset?
Yes. Well, Tesla's the leader right now in the market for automated vehicle crashes. So I think a lot of people think of Tesla as sort of synonymous with self-driving cars. My apologies about the slides. I think I have a timer, so they keep changing.
Oh,
But yeah, so because of that, I think understanding how people view Tesla gives pretty good insights about how people view self-driving cars as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another question here about the media stories that you were following. This person points out that it seems like a lot of them were local news stories, and I wonder if you could speak to that in terms of all the stories you collected. How many were of that sort of local news variety versus were there any that were sort of maybe bigger outlets that were covering maybe this issue at a larger scale, maybe a national publication or something like that?
Yes. So there were 202 total crashes investigated. Um, and I want to say almost all of them were local news stations, actually. Um, we used a database that had links to these news stations. So that's what we used.
Gotcha. Okay. And the question here is whether can you do any further analysis of this data set that you prepared based on the SAE category, like the level 1 to level 3 perhaps, or also the vehicle type as a electric vehicle versus a common vehicle, as this person states it?
Yes. That would be a very interesting thing to study in further studies. We didn't classify them based on their level in this study. Tesla operates at level 2, so they were all Teslas in this study. But I think it would be really interesting to look at just vehicles that just have ADAS systems and seeing how they perform and what the articles are like discussing them as well.
Okay, interesting. Would you say what would be some of the big takeaways from this research for policymakers? It sounds like people are wondering about what the takeaways would be for like the manufacturers and for those who are doing roadway design. But several questions about specifically policymakers. Do you think there's anything here that could be sort of more generalized into, as we're setting policy for AVs, like this is what we need to be thinking about as like priority areas? It seems like folks are focusing on this issue of functionality after dark and in dark conditions.
Yes, definitely. Some standards for manufacturers for the pedestrian detection systems and how they operate at night would be important. The media shows that there are many cases where pedestrians are hit at night, and this is what the news articles are discussing. And so improving safety standards for those systems might be one implication from this study. Also, improving the EV batteries to be more resistant to fires may also be an implication.
I know you spoke about the media or the findings related to the victims themselves or the pedestrians, possibly as the road user group. This person is wondering, how did the demographics of the victims themselves impact or come out in the media treatment? Or did you see any differences in how maybe a subset of a demographic group were treated or handled within the media frame?
We did not look at the demographics of the individuals that were discussed in the articles, but that would certainly be interesting for future studies.
We have handled most of the questions that have come in. One question that I had, I saved mine for last to make sure we let everybody else ask theirs, is one thing that I guess I would have expected to see come out is like adverse weather conditions or like rainy conditions or slick streets, these kinds of things. I feel like that in what I've read about these AV technologies is some of the functionality can break down a little bit in some of those conditions. Did that come out, or maybe I just missed it if that was a big feature of some of the stories?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Interestingly, weather was not among the most discussed keywords, but I could definitely see that being a concern addressed in articles.
And we've talked a little bit about pedestrians and their involvement in these crashes. What about bicyclists? Were there any, or maybe I should even broaden it to say bicyclists, scooters, any other vehicle types that might have been involved in any of these?
Some of the multi-vehicle crashes involved motorcycles, which was interesting. I don't think bicycles were one of the more prevalent vehicles discussed in these subset of cases, but this is also a very small sample compared to, I guess, the whole set of AV crashes that occur. So it certainly does occur, but we did find that motorcyclists are often involved in these crashes.
If there were others who were considering maybe a similar project where they might go, maybe they're going to go look at collecting similar information for non-Tesla involved crashes. Would you have any recommendations for those who would be setting out on this data collection and analysis process? Anything that maybe you learned along the way in doing this work that you think you would do differently next time or could inform other projects?
Yeah, I think so. I think that if you're doing text mining, it's important to within WordStat, they have like a default definition, and it's really important to update that with words that are specific to the domain that you're researching, because it's kind of like these words aren't applicable to every case, whether if, for example, if you're studying something in finance, words will have a different importance than they would in studying automated vehicles. So it's really important to like tailor your words that you're looking for to the study itself.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. And then one final one, did you run into any issues gaining access to the media stories themselves? It seems like other folks are suggesting that maybe a lot of the news outlets may have things that are locked down in terms of access, and maybe you used a separate database that I missed that part.
Yes, that was actually an issue. When we were downloading these files, a lot of them were behind a paywall or something like that. Some of them were also within a Wayback Machine, which they're archived articles, and you can only access them through this Wayback Machine. And so to get around that, we built a code within Python to get these files from those sites and then put them into text files and then analyze them within WordStat. But that process did narrow down our data set a bit because some articles really were just inaccessible. So it was an issue.
Well, Meredith, I'm looking at the questions. I think you've handled all of them. Thank you so much for your research and sharing the findings with us, and then answering everybody's questions. We'll look forward to opportunities to learn from you again on these webinars, and hopefully learn more about this research and how we can kind of incorporate it into our road safety work. So I think you have a slide at the very end of your deck that we wanted to show before people leave. We've got our next webinar scheduled for next month. It's going to be on April 26th. We're going to have a team of students: Jordan April, Lacey Emmerich, Alessandro Figueroa, and Deborah Shula, all from UNC Chapel Hill. They developed an online resource, an online Vision Zero resource library that they'll share with us next month. So we're looking forward to seeing you all back here then for that webinar. And again, we'll send some details out about the recording and the slides from this session in a little while. But thanks very much, Meredith King, for participating this month, and thanks you all for coming. And we'll hopefully see you next month.